Today, I want to talk about America's favorite nut, which isn't even a nut, it's a legume, the peanut. This clump right here, I did not even plant. They were left over from last year. The seed was apparently in the ground and popped up. Peanuts are an excellent source of protein. They're a great source of oil, and so they provide good fats, and they have a lot of protein in them. For those of you who can eat them, then this is a marvelous garden crop. There aren't too many really good protein garden crops, soybeans and so on, but the peanut is an outstanding one. It's delicious. Homegrown peanuts are really good. Kind of a bit of work. They're a bit of work, but they're really, really good. I have friends who request these over and over again when we roast our own here. So let's head out onto the garden and see what we can find. So right down here, I've got a clump of peanuts growing wild in the weeds. You want to make sure you got the right tool for the job. A shovel will work, but a spading fork is a much better tool for this job. The reason we like to use spading forks on root crops is because a shovel will slice a potato or a carrot plain in two. Now these will generally lift them up rather than slicing them. So when I get in here next to the peanut, I think I see the crown there. Where is it? Go. So this guy right here is the reason why in Hawaii you want to make sure to dig your peanuts just as soon as the first crown set nuts are done, because otherwise what will happen is it's moist here and the peanuts sitting in the soil will begin to germinate. Here we've lost a nut. I've seen there were several that germinated and they begin regrowing rapidly into more peanut plants, but you lose the peanuts. In the northern tier, peanuts will let you know when they're ready to harvest because they'll freeze off on top. That is, your nuts will freeze. If you're living out west, well, you could probably leave the nuts in the ground until they're dried out. You know, you want to catch them before the winter rains, I guess. But late in fall, the plants will dry out and they'll be ripe, and you can dig them up at that time without much fear of the nuts resprouting. But here we have to be more careful to judge when are our nuts ripe, because if we're not careful, they're going to start growing on us. So right over here, some rows of peanuts that I planted back in spring. As you can see, peanuts compete fairly well with weeds. I don't do a lot of weeding around here because too much cultivation loosens the soil up and then it all moves when we get too much rain. Alright, so let's see what happens here. Okay, well, we broke this one in two, so the other half's over here somewhere. Let's see what's on that. There we go. There's the rest of it right there. Okay, so I dug around for a little while out there. I found a fair amount of peanuts growing. And so the next step is we got to clean them. Now here I'm using a plain old nursery mud flat as a strainer to hold my peanuts, so when I wash they don't fly all over. Flip them over. So we have our peanuts cleaned off. Now, the way the peanut plant works, for those of you who are interested, is right there. You will see we have a little yellow flower. See the little yellow blossom there? This blossom is a typical legume flower, like a pea or a bean. The flower comes above the ground and then it pollinates. But once it pollinates, it pushes itself under the soil on these little enlarging stems and actually makes the nuts below the earth. Now, of course, this makes them far less susceptible to things like slugs and other critters that would chew them up. So the peanut is relatively well protected. It has a nice armored shell on it that would keep nematodes and other soil insects from getting after it very much. As I said, it's a legume, and so if we look right here, you can see that there are little bumps along the stems. Those little bumps are rhizobia bacteria that are living in a symbiotic relationship with this plant. The bacteria store free nitrogen that's in the atmosphere, especially during thunderstorms. Wow, there's a lot of it during a thunderstorm. The nitrogen is heavier than air. It settles to the earth as nitrous oxide ordinarily is typical, laughing gas. It's why we feel giddy sometimes during a thunderstorm. I'm sure if people say, for instance, who live in the east and the northwest, places where there's a lot of lightning, perhaps you've experienced that euphoric sensation when there's heavy lightning discharge. Yeah, it's the same stuff the dentist gives you to knock you out. Well, it's heavier than air. It settles down to the earth, and these little bacteria storehouses grab it, and they put it into little nodules on the roots. And so it not only feeds the peanut, or the bean, or the pea, or whatever legume you're growing, the soybean, it will feed the plant, because they will draw some of this nitrogen back out of their tissue to use it for growth. So legumes need less fertilizer than most other crops. But when we kill the plant and we rot it down in the compost or the soil, that nitrogen re-releases and then becomes fertilizer for other crops. Because of the high rainfall in Hawaii, we're always short of nitrogen here. The stuff's very mobile, washes away quickly. So when we get high rainfall episodes, the nitrogen vanishes down into the soil. So you got several double whammies here. We have a crop that will make its own nitrogen and share it with other plants. You also have a crop that will grow with less fertilizer in an environment where nitrogen is always deficient. So this is a marvelous thing. Now if we got our peanuts all washed off, the next thing we got to do with them is pull them off the stems. Now that we got our peanuts all dug up and washed off, the next thing we have to do is get the peanuts stripped off their little stems. This is a relatively labor-intensive bit of work. It's not too hard, but there's just a lot of it. If you got a good crop of peanuts, well, then you got a lot of stripping to do. Again, these waste plants really need to go back into the garden as fertilizer or mulch for the best advantage of this crop. Well, this is why I say that the peanut is a rather labor-intensive crop. It's just a lot of work to it because, you know, well, you plant them, that's no big deal. Harvesting them, it's actually pretty easy too. You know, they tend to stay right on their stems, they don't come off too easy, so as long as you get the timing right for harvest, you do fine with that. The hard part starts to come in, well, with all the washing. You want to get all the mud off your nuts. There's the washing and there's the picking of the nuts, you know, getting them off the stems. Don't worry, it won't hurt the nuts to pull them off their stems. Some of the nuts will be immature. You know, you have to have a nice, firm, round, large nut that's well ripened. And so some of these little tiny guys, like these little puny guys here, they never quite finished. You don't get all of them. I may be pushing the envelope on these nuts a little bit. Last year I let them go too long, and I lost a bunch of them because they sprouted on me in the rain. And so this year I'm being cautious, and I would rather take them up with a few juvenile nuts than lose the nice mature nuts as they begin to germinate. I saw that there were probably at least a half dozen or so that I'd spotted that were actually beginning to grow out there. I did not fertilize these peanuts, so they're growing on whatever nutrients were native in the soil over there. And so I've seen bigger yields. I think if we fed these, they would probably tend to produce a little bit more nuts. But all right, so there we go. Now we have nuts in this flat, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wash them again. All right, so one more washing. Try to get all the mud off of them. Okay, here we go. My nuts is acceptably clean. The next step is now we have to lay these out somewhere, and we have to get them to air dry. All right, so there you have the first half of the process of raising your own peanuts. I will continue this video later, and I'll show you how to get your peanuts prepared for roasting. We tend to like to use one of the stovetop popcorn poppers that turn. That's one of the best tools there is. Although iron frying pans work pretty well. It's possible to roast them in an oven too, but I really like using tools where I can see what's going on and I can smell what's happening. The difference between a nut that is perfectly roasted and a nut that is overcooked is very close. In fact, we'll talk about it later, but when we take these off of the heat, they have to be taken off early because they get so hot and they've got a lot of mass. They're going to keep cooking for a while after you've removed them, and we learned that lesson real fast. You can overdo these peanuts. You don't want to do that because, man, oh man, I have friends that when we produce homegrown peanuts here cannot get enough of them. This is a total Christmas present. Really, if you've never had your own homegrown, home-roasted peanuts, it's good. Might be a lot of work, but it's really wonderful. All right, thanks for watching the video. You all have a wonderful day, and don't let anybody steal your nuts.